Gentlemen, thank you so much. I know you're all very busy and you've taken the time to be with us this morning. I think to get us started, as we focus on inclusivity, it's very important that we all have the same definition of what we mean when we say inclusivity in the context of EdTech. So the first question I'm going to ask is, how would you define inclusivity in the context of EdTech, and why is it important for the future of education? And Mr. Nsengiman, I'll start with you, and then we'll take it from there.
Thank you very much, Rosie. I think when we talk about inclusivity in the context of education technology, we really are referring to the design of the tools, the platform, the content, in a way that ensures accessibility for everyone. And when I talk about everyone, I'm talking about all learners, regardless of their background, regardless of their abilities, regardless of the circumstance they're in. So it is something that we need to think about from the onset and not come to think about at the end. So when you're designing a product, for instance, you want to ensure that learners with disability, for example, are able to use that platform or are able to use the tool that you're designing. You also have to think about learners who are on the move, refugees, people who are displaced. How are they able to use that solution which you're designing? And so you're also looking at the different backgrounds, contextualizing with a culture in mind. Something that is designed for the West might not necessarily work here in Nigeria if you don't take into account the context of the area in which you are deploying your solution. And so these are all the elements and a lot more that one has to take into account when you're designing a solution to ensure that it's actually reaching the majority of the people or the learners which you're targeting. Now, when we talk about why is it important, really it's the same question I'm asking, why is education important? It is the most important aspect, enabler for young people to have a better life. This has been proven. I think everybody in this room has gone to a school, has been educated. We are all where we are. In part, the majority of the success is due to the education we've had. And so it's really important that we enable all young people to have the same opportunities like we had. And if we look at the education as is today, we find that without tapping into the power of technology, we will not be able to extend the access to this education for the majority of young people. As you pointed out, millions, over 90 million of people are already out of school. So how do we use technology not only to strengthen the formal education, but also to reach these young people who currently are not in school and give them a second chance, also tapping at the opportunities of the gains of education. So I think that's why it's so important.
Completely agree. Thank you, Mr. Nsengimana. Honorable Minister, anything to add to that definition or the importance of inclusivity of EdTech?
Thank you, Rosie. I've watched the journey of the center over the years and the fact that they continue to truly push the boundaries of how technology should support our goals and intentions in education in Africa. And what they're investing in today cannot be any more important. I'm sure we all know why. We're a continent where 70% of our people are under the age, for Nigeria, for instance, under the age of 30. About 40% in total for the continent is under the age of 15, which when you compare it to the rest of the world, which is about 25, you understand that we do have a significant challenge of ensuring that education is truly inclusive, because it is something that we must provide for everyone. And to answer your question, Rosie, I'll take it back. I think if you look at technology generally, by nature, technology doesn't start by being inclusive. That's the fact about technology, because technology is about doing things differently. And most of those who build technology find a new, exciting way of doing things, and they try to build that for society. So you find, for instance, when most of us were exposed to the internet, I remember when I used the internet for the first time in Nigeria, we were paying by minutes. You had to pay 30 naira by minute. And so you could only use internet at the max for 5 minutes as a young person in the university. And I remember back then, most of my classmates will pay me money to actually help them open their email account. So I was making money off helping people to open email accounts. My first SIM card in Nigeria, for instance, I believe we paid about close to 21,000 naira or something weird like that, which I think back then was probably somewhere close to $200 to buy a SIM card. Today, SIM card is free. So I think inclusion in technology, just to add to everything that Joseph has shared, it's a journey. And it's a journey that we can only achieve when collectively as people we are aware of why it is important. So the focus should be on why is inclusion important. Joseph has mentioned quite a number of them. But if you think of our world today, we're going through a trying time. Many multiple challenges facing the world. And one of the most important ones is actually the workforce that the world requires to continue to power development. When you look at most developed society, population is aging. They're not giving birth to more people. So workforce is declining. And those nations and the world will look to continents like Africa to actually try and help power workforce. But the challenge we have as leaders and stakeholders is that if we don't find tremendous new ways of educating our people en masse and ensuring that we give them the right skill set, we'll fail the world. We'll fail the world, just like we have so many resources that the world wants to benefit from. Again, we have human capital that the world is looking to us to help make available to power productivity across the world. But if we don't find inclusive ways of educating them, we will struggle. Which is why technology offers us that opportunity to be able to reach people wherever they are. We know that it's possible. We know connectivity can allow that young lady, young man in the village to have the same quality education as you get when you go to MIT or you come to Lagos Business School. We already know that's been proven. It is possible. But the challenge is how do we ensure that these people are connected and connected affordably? But beyond the connectivity as well, how do we ensure they have the devices to actually be able to access the content that we're providing for them? Then when you take it away from there, those with disabilities, how do we ensure that the technologies that we're building is truly, truly serving them? So I think when we frame it from that perspective, we start to see that inclusion in EdTech is not just something that is attractive. It is actually important. If we fail on inclusion, we failed on the most important reason why education technology is important.
Thank you, Minister. And you're absolutely right. The youth bulge in Africa can be a blessing or a curse, and it's our job to make sure that it's a blessing. Mr. Nsengiyumva, let me come to you now. What are some of the biggest challenges you've encountered in trying to implement inclusive EdTech solutions, and how did you address them? I think Bosun started to mention a few of those. Would like to hear from you on that.
Thank you. So first of all, let me pick from what the minister and Joseph, they've already alluded to, which I think they are very important points. To try and define inclusivity in this case from the education standpoint, and then address the challenges that I see important. From the design, I think what we need to better understand is learners' needs first. We start from the learners. Because by nature, education technology is a demand-driven tool. We are using education technology to address specific needs of learners and learning as well. So, if this is the way we are taking it, basically, we need to be specific. We know those are issues cut across from access, so access to technology for specific learners. And we know those learners are across the countries, so the regions. So how do you address the issue of connectivity in a city like Lagos or Abuja may differ from how you're going to address it in a remote place, where there's no electricity, where there's no roads, and so on and so forth. So that's really the demand-driven approach. Secondly, when we talk about learning, when we talk about learners, we are talking about teaching and teachers. I like some of the predecessors the point that I make that I found very important. Technology will never remove the need for quality teachers. Teachers remain so important. The issue is therefore, how do we use technology to support teacher professional development at scale? Because the problem we currently have, not only we need a great number of teachers that are actually well qualified, but we also need to equip them with the capability to use technology to improve learning, which is not actually happening the way it should. Most of the teacher professional development that we're seeing are still at a low scale. This is where I see technology helping to move to a large scale teaching, especially in professional development. The other issue that I feel technology actually challenge that I can actually talk about is even from the leaders themselves, the leadership. Because whenever we bring the issue of technology, people still bring the issue of financial constraint. To me, I think what is going to be important is what can we afford with Pranab technology? And this actually should be embedded in any budgeting processes for any education system in the world. Technology should not just be put aside. As we budget for infrastructure, we need to budget for technology as long as it helps to address specific needs of learners and learning. And last but not least, there's the issue of gender that we don't bring on board, which I think is very important. When you look at most people today that are trained and qualified in educational technology, they are still more oriented towards male than female. And this is very important because even at the level of teachers, we need to see more female engaged in educational technology. It has a greater impact in improving the teaching profession, but the use of technology as well. So let me stop here. Those are some of the challenges I believe are very important. Thank you.
Thank you, Albert. And I'm really glad you brought in this dynamic of gender and how we make sure that there's more equity in that space. One of the things that's becoming clear from this conversation is that there are a number of stakeholders involved, and collaboration amongst them will be key for us to achieve the goals of inclusive EdTech. Mr. Nsengemana, can you share an example of maybe a successful collaboration in EdTech that significantly enhanced inclusivity from your experience?
Thanks, Rosie. There are a number of examples. We can start with this room, right? I think it's out of collaboration that we're meeting here today. We have representatives from at least 9 countries where we have tech hubs. And of those tech hubs, we have 144 companies that have collaborated to extend the reach to a lot of people who wouldn't otherwise have access, particularly during the COVID time. And what we saw at that time, we had EdTech entrepreneurs who had the product. We had the telcos who actually, they zero-rated education content during that time. And then you had the government that was actually an actor in a number of countries. So that partnership allowed learners who were stuck out of school to actually access learning during that time. Unfortunately, that collaboration tend to is sunset. And so these are opportunities I see for all stakeholders to actually engage and find out how can we renew those collaborations, how can we expand it and make it more sustainable. That's an example of collaboration that can take place among the private sector, the public sector, and the development sector, as an example. We've seen also a lot of features that we take for granted today came out of the collaboration with organizations that advocate for people with disabilities and the tech companies. And so nothing really happens in the vacuum. It's born out of the collaboration. And that's why one of the reasons that we at the Mascot Foundation believe in collaboration. And we make sure that we are engaging all stakeholders It's one of the reasons we have this conference. It's so that we can discuss, we can find ways of working together to extend the reach, especially for the areas where the population are underserved. We talked about the issue of gender, for instance. We have countries where, if you look at the number of young women who graduate from secondary education, is below 10%. And so how do we tap into this power of technology? How do we collaborate to be able to increase that number? I think that's the opportunity that we have today.
Great, thank you. Honorable Minister, you started to talk a little bit about some of the issues with accessibility when it comes to inclusivity in EdTech, lack of devices, lack of internet access, etc. Can you highlight any recent technological innovations that have significantly improved the accessibility of EdTech?
Thank you, Jose. I think what I'm learning with education technology is that the problem we're facing is not lack of innovation and product, but product is being seen as a standalone without taking into consideration the infrastructure, which is the backbone for the product to work. And one example, which I think is commonplace, but most actors within the EdTech ecosystem is not paying enough attention to, is the Universal Service Provision Fund, which happens to exist nearly everywhere in the world, at least in Africa. Most African countries will have what you call your USP or USPF in the case of Nigeria. And the mandate and focus of USPF in the case of Nigeria and everywhere in the world is truly to connect the unserved and the underserved, right? And when we think of connection in that sense, it's not just by providing connectivity, but also funding really smart ways of getting technology into critical sectors like in the education space or public health. When I was appointed minister, because that fund sits under my ministry, I was astonished at the level of investment that the Nigerian government historically is made in actually connecting the unconnected and the unserved people. We did some desk research and we mapped out investment that is gone into computer labs in schools, and we found thousands of schools that has been connected. And when I was at CCO leading a technology incubation center, this was never a phenomenon that was on our radar. A lot of the solutions we were looking to take into schools require that most schools should have access to connectivity, computers should be there, teachers should be trained. But we were disconnected from what government was doing. And on the other hand, government didn't have the capability to actually sustain the investment. So the investments were being made, but give it 12 to 24 months, a lot of the computers were not used. Of course, at CCOP, we knew most schools had computer labs that were shut and weren't being used. But we didn't go as far as understanding where the funding was coming from. So for me, I think this is one innovation that I'll challenge everyone in the room, that when you go back to your country, you should find out more about your Universal Service Provision Fund. And you should ask serious questions as to how can you collaborate with a government agency that is responsible for that fund. Because in every country, that fund is consistently investing. And one thing we know for those who work in education technology is that putting computer in school is not the beginning nor the end. It's actually the content. What content are you putting? Is the content meeting the needs of the learners? Can teachers actually truly support the learners to use the content? In some cases, can teachers use it to augment learning? I remember one of the things we used to see at CCO back then was when you go into a classroom where a teacher is meant to use technology to teach. Sometimes it takes them 15 to 30 minutes to actually set up and get the technology to work. And perhaps a session is only for 30 or 45 minutes. So most of these teachers are discouraged from actually using the technology. So you see that significant gap. You have the innovation on one hand, which is pushing, finding new ways of investing. But it's disconnected from how technology is truly used in the classroom. So I think that's one example I'll give, and I'll say I'm not giving it as an example that we should celebrate. I think it's an example that indicates that most of the time the efforts and the innovation we see in EdTech is often disconnected from the overall ecosystem that is required to make it work. So we consistently invest, but this investment is not leading to the learning outcomes that we actually want to see amongst the learners.
No, thank you, Honorable Minister. And that's a really good example. Mr. Nsengiyumva, you made a really interesting point around technology not removing the need for quality teachers, and I completely agree with that. How would you say the integration of inclusive EdTech, though, has changed teaching practices and student engagement?
Thank you. Let me start by explaining what I call a cycle of making sure education technology is well integrated in education system. There's always a need to start with evidence. We need evidence that shows that something can actually improve learning. So this is where I see here a number of researchers that have a role to play to make sure that whatever way we use technology in education come from a clear evidence of what works. And therefore the question becomes, how do you take it to scale? The second is really professional development. How do we, once evidence is made and solutions are developed, how do you allow those that need technology in their hands to use appropriately? And this is where the teachers become very important. And some of the examples, and I'm seeing here colleagues from the Colorado University. We've been working with them around the simulation. So allowing teachers to use simulation when they teach science, technology, and math, for example. And right now we're developing a platform that allows as many teachers on the continent to learn from this simulation. So two things here. One, technology is helping teachers using technology to prepare their teaching materials. Second, technology is helping to create a community of practice beyond the country boundary to even beyond continental boundary, because we're working with the University of Colorado, which is far from the continent. Third, today we have opportunities to develop learning management systems that not only allow teachers to post their teaching materials, but also learners to be able to interact with teachers. So this is really a good example of what technology can do to improve the teaching, and especially the learning outcome in particular. The second is the issue of foundational learning, which is one of the critical issues the continent has. When you see many statistics coming out, literacy is still at a very, very low stage. So, and there are some good examples that are being developed to facilitate, to accelerate literacy level, especially for young learners. One of these examples is a system that allows to facilitate translation of books that are written in foreign languages into local languages. Because it has been clearly shown that when a child starts learning using a local language, it's easy actually to learn any foreign languages. And there are now technology helping to translate those books and allow as many young children as possible to use books that are written in their local languages. So this is why I see technology becoming so important. And this is what I was saying. Let's look at the learner's needs first and address those needs based on possible solutions that EdTech can provide. Of course, the point is also to say technology cannot help to address any issue. No, no, no. That's why it's very, very important to be focused and be realistic in this particular case. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nsengiyumva. As we sort of bring this panel to a close, I have one last question which I would like each of you to answer. And it's really, if you can tell us one key takeaway or action step that you'd like the audience to remember when it comes to fostering inclusivity in EdTech innovation. One key takeaway or action step. And Mr. Nsengimana, maybe we can start with you. Just one.
One word.
Not one word. Key takeaway or action step.
One key takeaway, I think, for me is design with inclusivity in mind.
Oh, that was short. I love it.
Right.
Great. Design with inclusivity in mind. Mr. Nsengiyumva.
I will actually put a trade-off. Learners first via the cost implication. So there's a trade-off. How do you balance the needs of the learners and the cost implication so that you can plan appropriately?
Perfect. Thank you. Honorable Minister.
I think for me, it would be to challenge everyone in the room to reimagine how you look at the ecosystem for education technology. I think oftentimes we think it's about just Ministry of Education, which is absolutely important. But what I've seen in government is that there are so many agencies and parts of government that you should be working with. And these agencies are constantly investing in the infrastructure that will allow you contribute to the agenda of the Ministry of Education. But most of the time, they're disconnected from the EdTech ecosystem. So we need to think more broadly around what that ecosystem truly is, and how do we get everyone to the table to actually participate. This is not one of those typical things where people talk about collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. This one is actually serious, because we're leaving a lot on the table by not bringing in all these critical institutions, some of them in the public sector, but also those in foundations and similar organizations that are spending daily to put technology into schools.
Great. Ladies and gentlemen, I think it is very clear how important the power of educational technologies are to ensuring that we democratize access to learning for everyone, irrespective of background, irrespective of socioeconomic class. I hope this session has been as insightful for you as it has been for me. A round of applause to our esteemed panelists, please. Thank you very much, gentlemen.